You know the drill. Take out a mortgage, buy a nice house in the suburbs, work a desk job for the next 40 years to pay it off, retire, die. They call it the American dream. That is not a dream, that is a nightmare. And for millions of people in this country, even that nightmare is out of reach now. But in a world full of white picket fences, 30-year mortgages, and rent checks that swallow half a paycheck, there are people who think differently. They are not waiting for the bank. They are not waiting for the government. They are not waiting for the housing market to come back down to earth. They are taking the wooden shipping pallets that warehouses throw away by the millions. They are scavenging windows from demolished houses. They are pooling $1,000 between 5 neighbors. And they are building entire homes with their own hands on vacant lots in cities that gave up on them a long time ago. These are the black builders, veterans, formerly incarcerated men, retired contractors, and grandmothers in work gloves who decided that the only way out was to pick up a hammer themselves. This is how they are doing it. Let's start with the wood itself. Every single year, American warehouses, shipping ports, and big box retailers throw away tens of millions of wooden shipping pallets. Most of them get burned for scrap. Some get tossed into landfills. A small percentage get picked up by craft furniture makers who turn them into farmhouse tables for suburban kitchens. But a few years ago, a handful of builders in Detroit and Atlanta started noticing something. The pallets were structurally sound. The wood was heat-treated and dry. The boards were already cut into uniform sizes, and the warehouses were happy to give them away by the truckload. A standard wooden pallet contains roughly 9 to 12 usable boards. Stack 40 to 60 pallets together, and you have enough lumber to frame a small dwelling. Add a salvaged window, a donated roof, some insulation, and a basic wood stove, and the total cost comes in around $1,000 per home. $1,000. To put that in perspective, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta cost $1,600 a month last year. The average tiny home built by a commercial company starts at $30,000 and climbs fast. A traditional new construction home runs $300,000 minimum in most American cities. But a pallet home built by community hands on a donated lot costs less than 1 month of rent in the city it sits in. That math is what started everything. The builders who picked up the first hammers are the people you would not expect, not professional contractors, not housing developers, not government workers. Many of them are military veterans who learned carpentry during their service and came home to find that the country they fought for had no place for them to live. Others are formerly incarcerated men who took construction training programs while they were inside, men who walked out with a skill and nowhere to use it. A surprising number are retired black contractors who spent 40 years building luxury homes for wealthy clients and decided their final years would be spent building free homes for people who needed them. And the labor crews behind those lead builders are organized, almost without exception, by mothers and grandmothers in church communities. Women who can run a build site like a kitchen with the same iron precision. Women who know how to feed 20 volunteers, schedule shifts, source donations, and tell a city inspector exactly where he can go. In Detroit, the movement found its first major foothold. The city has more vacant lots than almost any major American city. Decades of population loss left entire blocks empty, with overgrown grass in the foundations of houses that burned down or got demolished. A formerly homeless Army veteran, described in local news reports as a quiet, unassuming man, started gathering crews on those empty lots in the late 2010s. He had served 2 tours overseas, came home with injuries he could not name, and spent almost a year sleeping in a car before another veteran took him in. When he got back on his feet, he made a decision. He was going to build with his own hands, somewhere for the next veteran in his position to land. The first home took him 6 weeks, working alone on weekends. He scavenged the pallets from a beverage distributor on the east side of Detroit, who let him take as many as he could fit in his pickup truck. He pulled the boards apart by hand, denailed each one, sanded down the splintered edges, and stacked them by length in a friend's garage. The second home took 4 weeks because 2 other men joined him. Both of them had been homeless within the previous year. Both of them needed something to do with their hands more than they needed a paycheck. By the time he had built 10 homes, he had a waiting list of over 40 names, a Facebook page that had grown to several thousand followers, and 3 local churches calling him every week about donations. Strangers from across the country were mailing him boxes of nails, work gloves, and weatherproof tarps. A retired black contractor from Cleveland drove 4 hours one Saturday day to help frame a roof. He stayed for 2 days and went home with photographs of every home on the lot. Today, those Detroit pallet villages house several dozen people. The homes are small, usually around 80 to 120 square feet, which is roughly the size of a parking space. Each one has a single bed, a small counter with a hot plate, a chemical toilet or composting setup, and a portable heater for the brutal Michigan winters. Some of the newer builds have actual wood stoves with proper venting. A few have solar panels donated by an environmental nonprofit out of Ann Arbor. They are not mansions. Nobody pretends they are. But every one of them has a lock on the door. Every resident has a key in their pocket. And every resident has, for the first time in a long time, an address they can put on a job application. The city of Detroit initially pushed back, building codes, zoning rules, sanitation regulations. There were warnings, there were threatened demolitions, there were a few tense standoffs with city inspectors on cold mornings. And then, quietly, the city stopped pushing. Officials never officially approved the villages. They just stopped trying to tear them down. In a city with thousands of homeless residents and a shelter system stretched past breaking, the math eventually became impossible to argue with. Atlanta took a different path. A pastor on the south side of the city, the kind of man who runs a congregation of about 200 people and knows every one of them by name, looked out at his church parking lot one Sunday and saw something nobody else saw. He saw a build site. He started preaching on Sundays and swinging hammers on Mondays. He recruited from his own pews first, then from the surrounding neighborhood, then from a halfway house 2 blocks away that sent over men who needed something to do with their hands and their afternoons. By the 3rd week, he had a regular crew of about 15 volunteers, ages ranging from 17 to 72. The 17-year-old was a high school senior whose grandmother had told him to spend his Saturdays usefully. The 72-year-old was a retired union carpenter who had built office towers in downtown Atlanta in the 1970s and said he had been waiting 40 years to build something for his own people instead. In a single summer, that church parking lot produced 12 pallet homes. The pastor kept a hand-drawn chart on the wall of his office, marking off each home as it was completed. Names of the future residents were written next to each home in pencil, because he said writing them in pen felt like tempting fate. Each one was assigned to a resident from the church community, people who had been sleeping in cars or on relatives' couches, or in the rooms behind their adult children's houses where they tried not to be seen. The homes were placed on donated lots across the city, with informal agreements with the property owners that nobody asked too many questions about. Most of those property owners were Black families who had inherited vacant land from parents and grandparents and were happy to see something useful happen on it. And here's the part that surprised even the pastor. Of those 12 residents, 10 of them transitioned into permanent housing within 18 months. The Pallet home was never meant to be the destination. It was meant to be the stable platform from which a person could finally find a job, save a paycheck, repair a relationship, get sober if they needed to, and eventually rent a real apartment. The psychology of having your own door with your own lock and your own key turned out to be the missing piece in almost every recovery story. Social workers in 3 of the cities running Pallet home programs have started informally tracking outcomes. The numbers they are seeing, while not yet published in any official capacity, suggest that residents of Pallet homes find permanent employment at significantly higher rates than residents of traditional shelters. They reconnect with estranged family members at higher rates. They report better sleep, better mental health, and a clearer sense of identity. None of that should be surprising. It is just rarely measured. You cannot interview for a job when you are sleeping in a shelter that kicks everyone out at 6 in the morning. You cannot save money when your belongings get stolen every night. You cannot reconnect with your children when you have no address to give the social worker. You cannot stay sober when your only nighttime option is a sidewalk near a liquor store. You cannot rest in the way a human being is supposed to rest when you are constantly bracing for the next disruption. A tiny home, even a 100 square foot wooden box built from warehouse pallets, solves all of those problems at once. If this story is hitting you the way it hit the volunteers who showed up to those first build sites, hit subscribe. New documentaries every week on the people and movements quietly rebuilding the parts of this country that the rest of the country has stopped paying attention to. Now, let's talk about what the cities have been doing about it. The pushback has been significant. Zoning laws in most American cities require a minimum square footage for any legal dwelling. The numbers vary, but in many places the legal minimum is somewhere between 400 and 700 square feet. A Pallet home does not come close. Most are illegal the moment they are built. Building inspectors who would normally spend their days checking electrical work on new condo developments are sent out to vacant lots to write violations on dwellings that house people who would otherwise be sleeping in cars. Real estate developers have lobbied hard against tiny home villages in city council meetings across the country. In one Atlanta council session, a developer testified for nearly 20 minutes about the safety risks of unpermitted structures, citing fire codes and sanitation regulations and structural integrity standards. The pastor, whose church had built 12 homes that summer, sat in the back of the room and did not speak. When the council asked if anyone wanted to respond, he stood up, said his community had buried 4 people the previous winter who had frozen to death on Atlanta sidewalks, and asked the council whether any of those 4 people had been worried about sanitation regulations the night they died. He sat back down. The council did not vote on the issue that night. Their argument tends to come dressed in language about safety standards and neighborhood property values. The argument underneath is simpler. Tiny home villages on vacant lots compete with the rental market. People living in Pallet homes are not paying rent to anyone. And in cities where vacant land is being snapped up for development, every lot occupied by a tiny home is a lot that cannot become a luxury condo building. So the legal fight is constant. Builders relocate, villages get notices of violation. A few have been bulldozed, with residents given a few days to clear out. The movement operates in most cities in a legal gray zone that depends entirely on which way the local political winds are blowing in any given month. In some cities, sympathetic council members have started introducing legislation to formally recognize Pallet homes as transitional housing, which would put them under a different set of regulations than permanent dwellings. Those bills have not passed yet, but they are being written. But the builders keep building anyway. Because for every village that gets torn down, the people who built it know how to build another one. The skills travel, the pallets are still free, the vacant lots are still everywhere. The faces behind these homes are the part that most news coverage never captures. There is a widowed grandmother in Birmingham, Alabama, who watched her rent climb past what her late husband's pension could cover. She did not have children who could take her in. She did not qualify for senior housing because the waiting list was over 4 years long. She showed up at a church build site one Saturday morning, asked if they could teach her, and built her own pallet home over the next 2 months. She is 68 years old. She did most of the work herself. She had grown up on a small farm in rural Alabama, where her father had taught her how to drive a nail straight before she was 10 years old. She said the muscle memory came back faster than she expected. Her home sits today on a small donated lot near her old church, with a vegetable garden in front and a porch swing her grandson built for her birthday. There is a returning citizen in Houston who spent 14 years in state prison. He walked out with a construction certificate, no family who would take him in, and a parole officer who told him he had 30 days to find an address. He found a build crew through a halfway house and learned more in 3 months on those job sites than he had in his entire incarceration. He said the work taught him how to wake up early again, how to be responsible for something other than himself, how to stand next to another man and trust him to hold a board level while he drove the screws in. Today, he leads a crew of 6 men, all of them in similar situations to where he started. He has been out of prison for 4 years now. He has not missed a single day of work. There is a Marine veteran in Baltimore who came home with a traumatic brain injury, a discharge that did not qualify him for most VA benefits, and a knack for engineering. He spent a year designing a 4-season insulated pallet cabin that can handle Maryland winters without freezing the pipes or the resident inside. His design uses a double-wall construction with recycled denim insulation packed between the layers. The denim comes from a clothing drive at a local high school. The kids donate their old jeans, and his crews shred them into insulation material. His design is now being used by build crews in 5 other cities. He has never accepted $1 for it. He says the design belongs to whoever needs it. These are the names and stories that the housing statistics never capture. Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the population of this country, but on any given night, they account for nearly 40% of the people sleeping in shelters, in cars, and on sidewalks. That number does not have a face, but every single person inside it is a person, and a growing number of them are picking up hammers instead of waiting for the system to remember they exist. The movement is spreading. Houston now has multiple pallet build crews operating in different neighborhoods. Birmingham has a network of 3 churches running joint operations. Baltimore's veteran-led builders have started training programs that cycle new builders through every 6 weeks. GoFundMe campaigns are funding entire villages, with donors from across the country sending $20 or $50 at a time to cover the cost of nails, screws, and roofing materials. The next generation of Black builders is being trained right now on these job sites by men and women who learned the trade in the most difficult circumstances and decided to pass it on. What this movement is doing, quietly, without much help from anyone, is answering a question that this country has been refusing to answer for a long time. The question is not whether the housing crisis can be solved. The question is whether the people most affected by it should have to wait for permission to solve it themselves. The builders behind the pallet homes have already given their answer. They picked up the wood and started building, because a country that lets its citizens sleep on sidewalks in a nation with this much wealth and this much vacant land and this much discarded lumber sitting in warehouse parking lots is a country that has either run out of solutions or run out of will. And the people in these neighborhoods, the ones who have lived through the worst of it, are no longer waiting to find out which one it is. They are just building, one pallet at a time, one home at a time, one key handed to one person at a time. And every key changes something that no government program, no shelter bed, and no charity check ever could. It changes a person from someone who survives the night into someone who owns the door. If you found this story important, hit subscribe. New documentaries every week on the people and movements rebuilding parts of this country that the rest of the country forgot about. Now keep watching for the next story.